Hi, Neal. How are you? Welcome.
Hi Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm really looking forward to this, all day to be able to chat with you. So, so how is everything? How you doing? How is TD? How is life there?
Life is fantastic. We're very, very busy, but busy is a good thing these days, and really all the time. And we're working on a lot of exciting stuff. So it's a little hot this summer. I'm suffering with that, but it's
Yeah,
we're doing cool stuff at work.
yeah, yeah. Well, you're in the Northeast. I'm not gonna like kind of geotag you, but it's like, yeah, it's been like kind of a hot, somewhat humid, summer so far. So,
It's tough.
yeah, I realize life is tough, but it's lush, and that's what's like so great about living in the Northeast, as well.
Yes, yes, plenty of water.
Yeah. So, hey, I wanted to one, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. Um, I thought it'd be really kind of good to start with talking about like kind of your career journey, and kind of the decisions that you made along the way, and what kind of brought you into really kind of being like one of the industry architects, around kind of network design for some really massively large organizations, so I thought like that would be really good. And if there's any like one or two people who were really influential to you, like in your journey that others, could learn from, that would be super. So why don't we start there?
Yeah. So what? Sorry, Nick, I lost my screen here for a second.
Hmm. Okay. I see you.
Okay, got it. Sorry. Um,
Okay.
so this really kind of started by accident. In some ways, I mean, when I was in college, I was at NYU and I was studying either to try to be a doctor or I was really been getting into psychology. And I got an internship. And at that time, the industry was kind of making a big move into IP based networks. And so,
Yeah.
it was new to everybody at the internship. I mean, I was just doing it to sort of make some money and be able to survive in New York City. And these Cisco IP routers arrived. And it was a really interesting moment as I kind of watched the people that took to it and really kind of dove in, and the folks that kind of saw something new and kind of pulled back from it.
Hmm.
And I, probably the first career lesson that I got was to be one of the people who leans in, and try to embrace the new, and understand it and figure out how it's going to help because technology advances extraordinarily quickly. And
Hmm.
so so it kind of all started there. I had some options of which way to go when I had graduated school and decided to stay in technology and in networks in general,
Hmm.
and kind of just built from there. And so I went through an electronic communications network, kind of an alternative stock exchange, is where really I had gotten started. I worked at a hedge fund. I worked at a online kind of brokerage. I worked at then a set of progressively large banks, so
Hmm.
Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Bank of New York, State Street, in and I just kept sort of growing and growing my role. And
Yeah.
I really started learning this stuff on the job. It's not really. I didn't have a huge educational background in this. It wasn't a course of study that I kind of went through in school. But networking in general, I don't think was that well taught in universities at the time. And so, the vendors were the ones who were really providing that training, and I just kind of like sucked it up and just kind of pushed and pushed and pushed. Um, to learn more and to do more. And today,
Hmm.
kind of in my seat, I'm not just looking over networks, but I have physical data centers, networks, in both cloud and on prem. I have a large security team So a lot of where, what we see a lot is security blending with infrastructure and being implemented in the infrastructure itself. And so a lot of those control points sit with my team. And it's funny you said architecture, but I actually own infrastructure architecture for TD as well. So really kind of partnering with our enterprise architecture teams and understanding what the roadmap needs to be for the infrastructure itself to get where we want to go from an application perspective.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of, that's where I kind of spend a lot of my time today in those areas. And it's a pretty kind of wide remit. And some of those things don't always look alike, or, what we're thinking about in a physical data center space, and public cloud are, seem different, but they're actually really tightly aligned, in how, our applications kind of land, and the best places that we can service them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my path.
Well, that's, it's an interesting. So a couple of things in there. First of all, you're absolutely right. It's like there's really no formal education around networking. You might be able to take a course or two, as an elective, but that's really about it. I think, the vast majority, the hundreds of thousands of kind of network engineers across the world were really kind of like you kind of taught yourself or you got training from the vendor community.
Yeah.
And that's the way that, this industry progressed. And it seemed to really work really, really well. It's like,
Yeah.
so I think that, that kind of resonates. And what's really great, I think, in your story is to see just how fast your elevation, was, to really go from, I'm kind of assuming, like the brokerage, and the online brokerages were probably smaller, almost boutique size because they tend to be that, and then to go into, in essence, like, a Fortune 50, company and have a big role in that overall infrastructure. Now really having both cloud and physical networking and security over TD. It's like really just, congratulations, Neil. That's a great journey. It's a really great journey.
Sometimes it doesn't sometimes it's overwhelming. But
I'm sure.
but I think, a lot of that is about opportunity, and sometimes these things happen. Sometimes they're a little bit of luck, and sometimes it's a whole lot of timing. And it is about sort of having what I found is having a really clear communication path with my managers and saying, hey, I think I can do that, and would you let me try it, and can I go do this, and really building from, hey, I'm going to execute really well, I'm going to do the best job I can, and I'm going to set the stage for me to ask for that next thing and ask for that next opportunity. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to wait for it, and that's kind of the way it goes. But that's kind of just how it played out for me.
Yeah, that's not well. I think that whole sequence and that process is like really key. Like Andy Brown last, no, it wasn't last fall, the fall before that. He gave a keynote on day two, and I thought it was like actually it might have been the best, that
Mm,
we ever did. And one thing that he was talking about, he was kind of going through his career path, and he was, I forget the person he named. It was like one of his mentors, and the way that he was mentored was that he would get a project, would have a certain scope of responsibility, and if he did really good, he would be rewarded with another project that had a larger scope, and just kept on the scope, just kept on growing, to kind of be commensurate with his ability, and that just kind of allowed him to kind of just continue to grow, And I think those are, it's a simple concept, but a really powerful one, And so it's nice to hear that, that's part of your history, as well.
yeah.
Was there anybody that was kind of really influential, to you over the last couple of years
I
or
don't,
during
I
that?
don't know. I don't know that it was ever a single person. I think I collect, bits and pieces from a lot of people. It's interesting that you mentioned a keynote, and I actually remember sitting at an ONUG. I think it was at Citigroup, and I think it was Greg Lavender that was speaking, and
Um,
he was talking about we were talking about automation, or he was talking about automation, and he was talking about, like, he was making this analogy of a tree, and sort of people who are stuck, hugging the old tree, and we're going to give you a better
Oh,
tree, and all this, and it's those, so I think, little bits and pieces of things that I've collected, and here and there, have just kind of helped shape it. But I don't know that there's, a single, I wanted to be this person, or this guy or this gal. It was more of kind of just, um, an exploration, and I may,
yeah.
I'm still not sure I'm there. I may, it may change tomorrow. So I want to reserve that right.
Yeah, you never know. I think I remember that talk, from Greg over at Citigroup. That was a good meeting. Harmon, hosted that one. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's like, I know I asked that question, a lot because I think it's always kind of fascinating. Like we get influenced by people that we don't even. Sometimes we don't even know them personally, but like it's something that some personality either says, or you see them do something, and then boy, it lights kind of a fire. Like for me, early on in my career, like this is like probably in the early 1980s. I was still in college, like mid 80s, and I saw, I think, it was Steve Jobs on PBS, and I never heard anyone speak like that. It's like just the
Mm,
excitement, that came from him was so genuine, and it was so powerful. And that kind of just like said, no, to me, it's like, wow, it's like I want to kind of move. I want to make sure that my career is within high tech, and that, I want to start a company at some point in time, so like that.
yeah,
I remember that as being kind of defining, point, for me. So I never met Steve, and but there's lots of personalities that you come across, without knowing them, and they have big influence, potentially on you. But
totally.
okay, you mentioned about leaning in. This is one of those times. A lot of people are kind of leaning in, these days. So we've been focusing around kind of how AI is, both from an infrastructure point of view, how many are thinking about how do we support AI workloads. So how networking and storage, and even compute, is either being reimagined, redesigned. And then there's also the other part, of it, is that, okay, well, how can AI help, and assist what we're currently managing and dealing with, And so let's talk about the latter one, because I'll come back to the former,
Yep.
in a second. But on the latter one, are there any particular tools that you're kind of excited about and that you've been using, or anyone in your team has been using, that you're like, wow, this is like really going to make a big change?
Yeah. Well, so I think in general, the potential for change is enormous,
Mm-hmm.
and so there are. But I think on the tools end of it, one of the things that I'm more concerned about is sort of this AI whitewashing of all of the things. And frankly, as a enterprise consumer, it's that makes things difficult, right? If our partners are coming at us and saying, I got this AI thing, I got this AI thing, that requires a great deal of kind of model risk management, and a great deal of exploration into what is that thing that you've got, what is it doing. We need to make sure, and stability and security is kind of our bread and butter. Like we need to have that. So I do think there is still a lot of hype around that, and that has drowned out a good deal of the good things that are actually sort of coming.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I think, obviously, whenever you have a problem where there's a lot of data involved, and
Yeah.
kind of IT operations has a ton of data, whether it's telemetry data, from all of the systems, and we were talking to Nonag about this for such a long time. Like, I remember
Mm.
running the network state collection, correlation, and analytics work group, and that was 10 years
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
and we sort of recognized then, we thought, hey, this would be great for automation, and this is going to be, all these things. But what we quickly, very, very quickly figured out was, if we don't have the data, we don't have anything. We can't do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And it kind of almost got unsexy, because we started talking about, like, data models and, really
Right.
kind of standardization around data models. I still think that we're at that I still think we have that problem.
Yeah.
And so from a tooling perspective, there's a lot of excitement, but I think it's a very heavy lift to get all these different kinds of data in a spot where they can actually be leveraged. And so, there's a lot of vendors in the marketplace who are saying things, and it's worthy of exploration. Um, but I think there's a lot of work still. There's a kind of a secondary component to that, which is, first being, okay, can I actually act on all this infrastructure telemetry that I'm getting? Like that would be awesome. But secondary, like from a design perspective, we create tons of design documents and
Mm.
all sorts of supporting things that I quite frankly think we create. And this is, by the way, every company I've been at,
Yeah.
will create all the change records and designs and architectural, high level designs and low level designs. And like, even in, kind of your inventory database, there is, a lot of, cross joining of, here's an application, it, is identified with a code, and that code we can now say is running on this server or this switch and those type of things. That is a great problem to really begin intelligent search,
Yeah.
and say, hey, how can I like search this huge repository of information, not necessarily on the just like the straight, signal act, but is there a way that I can learn more about this really quickly? And I'm going to bring
Mm.
up another ONUG keynote because I remember another one was Steve Russell from Morgan Stanley, and I
Yeah.
remember him describing what he called the five guys problem. And he said every time we have an issue, we end up having to call the same, five people
Yeah.
in order to unwind that issue. And that is very true, because it's usually the people that have designed that thing or like are intimately aware of how it's built. You don't want to be one of those five people, right? You don't want your phone
Yeah.
to ring at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't.
Yeah.
And so if those people were actually creating a proper, proper documentation and those type of things that could be searched, indexed and searched at the time
Yeah.
of an issue, you would enable your operations team to act as opposed to call.
Right.
And so I
Mm.
think there's two really big things that are going on there on the AI ops, or two big potentials on the AI ops side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the data, kind of the data management, data modeling piece is like the biggest thing to kind of solve. And when we went through this, and what we found, one, I think everyone gets the idea. It's like, oh, okay, we have all these emitters. Let's capture that. Let's canonicalize it in some way, and then let's store it so that we can actually now have this large data lake. And we can actually just run applications on it and for security, for network design configuration. There's a
Yeah,
lot of value that will come from that. And I think, and there's from a technology point of view, there's like two ways to do that, right? You can go like the Splunk way, which is that you have one company that does their own canonicalizing that, and then they absorb that, ingest it, and then you can do their applications, and that's very vertically integrated. The other part that we haven't seen really any companies kind of emerge in is that you have modules, and so you have kind of AI translators, right? That will kind of do that, provide a very custom interface, for a wide range of different companies because all their schema is different, So,
yeah,
that's kind of an open space. We did that with CSNF, so we have
yeah,
at least all of
yeah,
that mapped for the cloud security telemetry. But there's a bigger problem that that you're addressing, and then there was another thing that we came up across, and that was a lot of the vendors, in the kind of an application dependency map, right? It's like
yeah,
all those devices, they view that data as proprietary, and it's unique, and so they don't want it to be, standardized or normalized, so I think so. There are some market forces that are kind of getting in the way, but I'm hopeful, that it's a big enough space with enough dollars, a massive amount of dollars into it, And the overall value and benefit is there that there's got to be a really great market opportunity, in that. And as long as we can continue to um, endorse, promote, encourage, that I think it will happen. It's clearly happening in kind of ecosystems, but not kind of across, ecosystems yet. But so I think that would be a massively great tool, to have.
Yeah.
It's like I think the way that I'm thinking of what you had just said is really to be able to take all this telemetry data and then ingest it, canonicalize it, and then being able to like actually do something interesting with it. And especially if we have AI models that can, or co-pilots that can actually start focusing on particular tasks and managing those tasks, whether that's, capacity planning, topology, traffic flow
Oh yeah.
analysis,
Yeah.
signature identification, security signature identification, and, anomalistic behavior and so forth,
The
right?
IT operations co-pilot, you know, would be an amazing product, right? Where they are able to sort of query that information with natural language and sort of get answers very quickly. Um, that's the killer app, right? And
That's
so
a
and so
killer.
where I and again we've been public. We're doing some of this kind of similarly on like with trying to assist contact center agents, and clearly, and by the way, like I see that across the industry, a lot of contact center agent, assistive technology, which essentially takes big repositories of information and lets them search through to find the answer for a client very quickly.
Hmm.
And that's much more standardized, right? That's much more text
Yeah.
based. Whereas what we're the IT operations problem, which is a similar use
Hmm.
case. Like I need help getting answer to a question. It's
Yeah.
just that the repository of data is a little bit gnarlier,
Yeah.
and
Good term.
yeah, yeah, and it require. I mean, and even just understanding what that needs to look like in order for it to be queryable is a pretty hard problem. That I'm sure that there are people like starting to look at. Um, but I think that'll set the stage in IT operations for the next 5 or so years.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really hopeful there. It has all the right elements, for AI to have a really big impact on that. Are there any so that's a little bit more kind of like, okay, I think what we all see is kind of like a really big problem that AI can solve. Is there anything like, today, like obviously a lot of people who use ChatGPT, but there's a lot of people concerned about the security of, asking questions, and that say vulnerability vector, of an organization, but there's lots of other kind of private tools that are available. Is there anything that you guys are using that that you've been impressed with, or you're still waiting?
Well, so a couple things there. I think the cautious approach here is the right one, and so and ourselves, I think other banks, again that contact center use case to really enable our agents to be able to service our customers better has
Yeah,
been kind of the real kind of moving out. Now that's the data that's involved in that is not I wouldn't say is crown jewels type data, right?
yeah,
That is, it is important. It is important procedural information, but it is not like PII type data, and so we really reduce a bit of the exposure of some of this, right? And also, we are still thinking of this, and I, again, taking temperature of the industry, it feels like most still are as assisting humans, not
right.
replacing humans.
Yeah, yeah,
And so there's still a human that's involved in saying, "Hey, did I get a good answer or did I get a hallucination?" Right?
all
And
right,
so
yeah,
I think that we're all still being very cautious with that.
mm,
And so yeah, and yeah, so I think like again, I think that's kind of where we are now. The future, I'm sure that we and everybody else is going to continue kind of moving and being more aggressive. And I think that that's going to, we leverage some things in public cloud, we leverage some things in private. obviously the bar to entry on building AI within your own data centers is very, very high.
Right.
The infrastructure that's involved for training is serious. Like, it
Yeah.
requires an enormous amount of power and cooling within your data centers. The a rack of GPU enabled kit, it's tremendous.
Mm.
And so it outpaces our capability. And I think also, if you look around, it is now getting difficult to get space in co-locations and in other spots there. And we kind of keep our eyes on that as well. At some point, we're going to want to do something that we don't want to see in a public cloud that we want in private, right? I mean, I think that's a pretty good statement,
Yeah.
probably for the industry. And we're kind of just really watching that and keeping our pulse on things and trying to understand where and when that might be, and what would be available to us at that time. But I think with that, right, like where it is today, where the tech is today,
Yeah.
we have to see more power efficiency out of that in order for it to be more pervasive.
Yeah.
Very few people can do this in their own data centers, by and large, right? So, and I know that the compute industry is looking at that and really trying to kind of optimize. But we'll see how that goes. But I do think that could be a limiter to huge adoption, um, in the next few years.
Yeah, well, for sure. Well, you have large capex because it's a vertically integrated, offering from NVIDIA, and we don't have many alternatives right now around GPUs. So hopefully that will, open up, and then on the operational side of it, power consumption, is, it's like the one of the stats. Everybody has their own stat that they love, but this one I love is that if we all use ChatGPT instead of like Google, it would require the power consumption of Ireland. Country of Ireland, you got to run that. Like, okay, yeah. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no,
And
I totally
we
get it.
started this talk talking about how hot it is outside, and I don't
Yeah.
want it to be any more hot. You know what I mean? And so that, but and that that is that's gonna drive that, right? Like that just giant consumption of power. I just kind of canvassing and talking to people around. I know that there's a lot of thoughts on private nuclear, small nuclear
Right.
facilities to build off grid. First of all, it's really exciting times that we could even be thinking about doing things like that. Like that,
Wow.
that's super exciting. But that, those are not trivial. Those are some serious investments that need to be made to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, actually, I was just on a phone call with BT. So BT is hosting us in London this year, and so it was, Colin Bannon was mentioning that the Nordic countries are now building out data centers, and they're basically for those particular applications that don't have really stringent latency requirements. They're kind of using networking, right? So it's like you kind of send the job, up into the Nordics. It's cooler up there, and then you get your response, back.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there's a bunch of work that's you're right. There's a lot of now innovation and engineering around how do we solve this power consumption, problem. Frankly, I've always been, I can't say a fan of nuclear, but I've never been fearful, of nuclear, other than like, when I'm in a bathing suit, I think I look like a Chernobyl monkey, but but I don't think I spend much time up there, but anyway, so no, you're right. I think there's a lot of now innovative thinking that's going on to this, and we'll solve this problem. It'll just take a little bit of time. But the barrier of entries
Yeah.
have got to lower. But with nearly about $1 trillion being spent on AI hardware and infrastructure, and a lot of that, the vast majority of that, being done by the cloud providers. That that the cloud providers are, the tool sets are just going to be, extensive and expansive, for writing applications. So you're right. There will be kind of hybrid models, but there will be a lot of AI tools coming from the cloud providers, and they already are. It's interesting. We spent probably 5 years, and I'm talking about how do we provide multi-cloud connectivity. And this AI is probably the killer app for multi-cloud, right? Because they're all going to have their different constructs. They're all going to have their different kind of benefits and values
Yeah.
around for the application developers. And so developers will mix and match, those constructs for their applications.
I,
Maybe,
I would say we're seeing, like, we have totally seen that in the networking space. I mean, the networking teams would say that we were multi-cloud far earlier than any probably other team at the organization, because we've been building connectivity to them. I think, yeah, and like you said, we're applications now seem far more complex. It is not something that runs in your data center. Now it's something that's like, there may be a piece in the data center, there may be a piece that's coming from a SaaS, there may be a piece that you're running in public, and stitching that all together becomes a networking issue. And it's weird. I mean, I feel network. Maybe I'm a little biased, but I feel networks have become very, very important again. In that, like, that transit between different pieces of things, and making sure that that latency is tight, and you're able to meet kind of the non-functionals and the SLAs of applications, is definitely something that we're dealing with on a daily basis, and
um,
we don't want to stop developers from having that great idea, and, oh, if I could just get this data here, magic happens. And so we're kind of tasked to do that every day. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think therein kind of lies the second major industry use case, right? And that is what happens when AI gets buried deep into the protocol stack. So for example, on routing, routing today still use best effort. It's still, you know, um, goes hop by hop. We have very little metrics that kind of define a path, between point A and point B. But what happens if we start to change, the way that routers work, and so that there could be a lot more intelligent information other than running Dijkstra, the Dijkstra algorithm, and then figuring out like all the paths and going hop by hop. What if we were able to kind of look at, not just put a phantom cost onto a path, but look at the quality of service of that, look at the latency associated with that, look at the security posture, of it, look at the real dollar cost, of utilizing that transit component, look at the variability of that latency or the jitter associated with that. There could be a wide range of different metrics, and instead of having this static, routing algorithm that works, there can actually be kind of AI modules that are actually looking across these and then actually stitching them together. And I think that's we know that we've been having some discussions at some sessions at ONU, around this. It's only going to get bigger. It's only going to get better, around that. And I think that's probably the killer use case, because there, to your point, Neal, is that traffic patterns are going to fundamentally change because of just the way that the applications are being written. There's no longer this north, south, east, west. It's kind of like Brownian motion. It's like just stuff going all over the place, and so it needs to be well thought out, and then that needs to be tied into like a policy control, right? So that, okay, this application has to deliver this kind of service to this user, and so
Yeah.
that's kind of inference input, into like a kind of an AI routing
Totally.
algorithm,
And
right?
I would say that, this is part of the problem that SD-WAN was really like solving right now, and maybe not as fully kind of all the way there with what you were just saying, but, like, first use cases for SD-WAN for many weren't actually even just going straight internet, right? But it was actually running over the top of MPLS networks, because you couldn't see in the middle of them, and you couldn't tell when you were having a brownout. And
Right.
so you're running
Mhm.
something that really brings a bit more intelligence over the top. Now that's very good for, like, campus retail kind of locations and things like that. But what I think the next game really is for what I see. I think that the internet like an enterprise's internet edge and extranet edge, where you have kind of private B2B connections, and which tend to be larger than you would do in like a store location, in a a standard kind of retail store. Having that intelligence facing off on, if I've got many 10 plus gig connections to cloud, knowing how they're operating and knowing if that's causing an issue, like that's going to become critical in a way that it wasn't before. And I think that there's
Mm.
some things in there, but we need a lot more. I was actually just having this conversation last week with a CTO from one of the carriers, and talking about, like, well, how can you show me more of your telemetry so that
Right.
I know what's happening in your environment, and I can make decisions on my end. Now, I don't want to make human decisions. I'd rather make automated decisions, or ultimately an AI decision or something like that that says, hey, that carrier is having a bad day. We're gonna get out of there. But it's essentially bringing that same type of SD-WAN type knowledge just into different types of transports.
Yeah, yeah, and very insightful. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, like, the industry is um, trying to figure out which miracles they want to work on. And there's
Yeah,
it's there's
can't do it
like
all.
you can't do it all. And so it's like, I think we're in that kind of sorting out phase. I think also, want to guide that process. I think that you really alluded to that a second ago. And yeah, I had mentioned there's like about $1 trillion spent in AI infrastructure, and now the question is, what's the ROI? When will revenue start to flow into those, especially the cloud providers that will compensate, for that? And I think so. If we think about even what you had said, and we heard this in Dallas too, Michael Milligan, the kind of risk officer over at FedEx, gave a presentation, and he was basically saying, and I've been hearing this over and over and over again, it'd be interesting if this resonates with you, is that their compliance and their risk department is, they've been working on and putting in guardrails. Okay, well, this is what you can do. This is what you shouldn't do, because like they just don't know what they don't know, and so they don't want to be exposed to something that they can unwind like pretty quick. So I'm not sure if you're seeing the same thing, where it's like really compliance and risk really has a kind of a forward-looking role here,
Oh
to
yeah.
put in the guardrails so that, hey, when we had the cloud and DevOps kind of came together and provided this explosion of kind of like innovation, and I think compliance and risk was behind that, and they had to kind of like really catch up, try to catch up. I think they're smarter now. I think they're trying to lead. So I'm not sure
Oh
if you're
yeah.
seeing the same thing.
Look, I think we're all trying to learn, right? And I,
Mm,
it's funny when you have to all of a sudden become an expert on something that you just heard about yesterday in order to protect a company, right? And
uh,
so I don't envy that at all, right? I think that our kind of second line, our kind of audit folks, our risk folks, and frankly the regulators, we're all trying to learn together. Like this, the sort of AI thing kind of went really quickly. I mean, in some ways you could say, okay, this has always been growing that way, but like it feels real fast what has happened in the last 6 months of actual use cases and people kind of racing to get them out. And that's why I'm saying, like, we're taking a lot of measured approaches to kind of de-risk
uh,
those early things, while while it feels like we all kind of come and get educated and figure out, like, well, how do we secure this? How
yeah.
do we make sure that our data isn't poisoned and our models are pointed against bad data, right? And that's going to lead to inaccurate answers. And there's many different security risks in AI, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert or even know what they all are at this moment.
Mm,
And I think that's sort of that other thing that's kind of happening is we're all just trying to learn and hold back the tide enough to make sure that we're not doing things that are foolish and exposing things that we shouldn't too early.
yeah.
On the ROI sort of question, this feels very much like every technology transformation, that ROI is not there until it's there.
Hmm.
And it's sort of
Yeah.
like you have this bubble cost of, okay, well, I was doing something this way, and now I'm going to have like this, I'm going to do it two ways for a little while, and then one falls off. And so that, my guess is there's going to be a pretty big uptick, and plus the technology here that we're talking about is not cheap. I mean,
Yeah,
anytime I look at a next generation tool set for anything, it costs four times as much as my old one. And
yeah,
yeah, it brings a lot with it, but that for me is a difficult thing to, okay, I got to make a case why I should be spending, four times more on a similar product because it has much more potential moving forward. I think that's the same thing here. Like, as you kind of this transformation, it's expensive to change,
yeah.
and that will take time to really kind of hit the return on that. I think we
Yeah,
got some time here.
I think you're, yeah, well, I think you're right. I think like, I don't think a lot, it depends upon like really the scope, for example, coming up in this fall, Spiegel is going to do the keynote. And so over at Memorial Sloan, Kittery, so, probably arguably the best cancer research, institution on the planet. And what he's going to talk about is just like fascinating to me, and I sure hope it comes to fruition. But like they've been doing a lot of work with AI models around cancer research and cancer treatment, right? And so you know, literally what Svi told me was that, and obviously Svi, he's a CTO. He builds the infrastructure, for all the various different departments for them to run their kind of AI programs over. He's basically saying, it's like, in 5 years, he's like, Nick, I'm not saying 15, I'm not saying 50, I'm saying five. In 5 years, you'll go to a doctor, and that doctor will say, I got some, bad news, and I got some good news. Now, bad news is that you have cancer. The good news is that here, you take these pills, and then 3 months will eradicate it. So he didn't say for all cancers, but he's
Yeah.
saying what they're saying is that they're starting to chisel away, a cancer at a time, and really kind of diving into the DNA of them and being able to really target them with medications. And he's saying, no more cutting it out with surgery, no more radiation, no more, chemo. Um, I'm like, Svi, I am so hopeful that that is like true. That is like what a contribution to humanity, and that's kind of hard to judge an ROI on that. That
Oh,
is
oh yeah.
like impossible. I guess you could do calculation about what the medical cost is, for cancer treatments and blah blah blah. But on the human level, that's huge. And I think every
Yeah.
industry is going to have their miracles. Like in finance, there'll be miracles there, and clearly in manufacturing, we're seeing it in personal, vehicle tech, and obviously we're seeing, automated car driving. I am so excited about this phase in our industry, and what I'm really super excited about is that we all get to participate in it. We get to build that infrastructure that enables this to happen, and that's just a great place to be. It's like great to wake up to like know that you're doing something really positive, and
I
contributing.
I hope so, and I agree with that. I mean, I really hope that that's true, and that we reach that, because that is a wonderful future. If that is, if that come, and I think we should maybe all just focus on that. I mean,
Yeah, that's
the
yeah,
human
that's a
benefit, is a serious one, and I like, and then again, from a health perspective, I think that really should be our top priority. But from people being comfortable with kind of their finances and everything, there are definitely human benefits across. You talk about self-driving cars and things like that. Assisting a driver who avoid an accident. Like, these are all human health concerns. At the end of the day, it's not just kind of cool widgets. And maybe it's a little bit of cool widgets too. But I mean, I think
yeah.
there is that aspect, and I think that's probably what we really need to focus on.
Yeah, I agree. So, I know we're kind of at the top of the hour. I want to just give you like maybe, a minute or so, like to express maybe what you think or what you hope for, what this future will look like in the next like 3 to 5 years. Like where, you know, what would be really goodness, for our industry, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, thank you for that. This will sound a little silly, but whenever I'm kind of asked something like this, I say, I want to drink more coffee. And what I really mean by that is I want more downtime. I
Yeah.
want more time where I'm not chasing after an outage and, doing all those things, but I want more time to be spending with our employees, with customers, with, assisting them to get what they want, helping our employees with their development plans. You think about all the things that we don't have time for. I feel like I don't have time on my own development plans these days. And so, you know, really investing in technology to assist us and to make sure that we are now clawing back more time actually gives us more development time, and it gives us, we can move the industry faster, I think,
Mm.
if we're having this. And I think, a lot of people get very concerned about, jobs being impacted negatively. But there's so much more to do, and there's so much more that we can do. And so I hope to have more coffee chats and more talks like this, and
Mm.
more development conversations and more mentoring, and all that kind of stuff.
What a great vision. What a great future. Like really, it's like I was thinking something totally different, but you're right. It's like get rid
I
of all
keep
the
it simple,
toil.
Nick. I keep it simple.
Well, it's simple, but it's also complex because like it's really to kind of get rid of the toil. It's really it. Get rid of all the toil, and so that we can, be more human, and interact with the people that are around us, and it's a better life. Yeah. Well, I think
That's it.
I don't want to end on anything else because that's a really great way to end this. That was really great, Neil. Thank you for that.
Awesome. I enjoyed the talk today.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for spending the time. All right. Thanks, everyone,
Have
for
a good one.
plugging in.